Well, hello to everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. My name is Steve Wiss, and I'm joined as ever by Jonathan for Doug. But we're back 2 weeks running here. Jonathan, how are you doing?
Hi, Steve. Hi, everyone. Yeah, we just literally before recording this, starting this recording, Steve said the words. I think this is going to be a feisty one. So let's see how it goes. It's going to be an interesting one. It's been a very interesting week in both leagues, Norway and Sweden. So I'm looking forward to getting into it, Steve. I know you've got a few things to get off your chest this week. But yeah, how are you doing? And thank you to everyone listening. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing well. Improved from last week. I was a bit ill last week, as you know. Just about managed to get through the episode with my voice. Still not 100%, it must be said. But yeah, I do have plenty to say about both Allsvenskan and Eliteserien this week. I think there's been plenty of talking points. And, it was a real toss of the coin where we started this week. But we are going to be starting in Sweden because it was, I have to say, an absolutely remarkable round in terms of results. I have never, ever known a round anywhere in the world, really, of a significant league where every single match resulted in an away win. Every single match was an away win. And 7 of the 8 matches were exactly by a 2-1 score, which is incredible, really, isn't it? What the hell is that about? Absolutely ridiculous results. I will go through them now. Let's say the 4-0 win was Elfsborg against Kalmar. And every other match ended in a 2-1 away win. So Varberg won against IFK. Halmstad won against Norrköping. Mjällby won against Malmö. Hammarby won against Sirius. Häcken won against AIK. Degerfors with a rare away win against Brommapoikana. And Djurgården beating Värnamo 2-1 as well. I mean, some of these wins were big underdogs on the road as well. It's not like they were heavy favourites or anything. So remarkable round, Joth. Just talk me through that. I mean, Allsvenskan is known for being generally quite fairly home dominant. So just an anomaly, perhaps.
Yeah, great question and a great place to start. If you obviously want to listen to the Norway section, you can skip to part 2, but hopefully you'll stick around. That's the beauty of podcasts. You can move forward and backwards as you wish. But yeah, funnily enough, we had this question from Jim Cod. Jim _Cod 83, and well spotted to him as well. He's from London apparently, according to his Twitter bio, where he said every Allsvenskan game was won by the away side. Was this the first time it's ever happened? I have to be honest, I don't know the answer to that, and I'd hazard a guess and say no, but I don't know. As you've mentioned there, almost every single game ending 2-1 to the away team. It's only Elfsborg breaking the form guy with that 4-0 win. But yeah, I can't remember it being this this away dominant, Steve. I mean, I do think in general away football, I think modern football has kind of changed to the point where playing away from home is no longer really an issue. I think now with modernization of pitches, I think with kind of better game analysis, video analysis, you can watch teams. It's not like you know, if you think maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago, you're traveling into a bit of the unknown. Maybe you've got one VHS of the team playing, but that's about it, and maybe you've got a dodgy bus ride and things like that. Nowadays, it's more luxurious travel, even in leagues like this, maybe second tier leagues. I know that there are some tough away trips, but there's no Gibsonsfjord this season, for example. There's no Ostersund, where you're really traveling up deep north kind of thing. So there's a bit more. I think there's a little bit less travel in the league this year, and of course, just the fact that, like I say, more and more the game is modernized. It's easy to watch these teams inside out, and you've got analysts and statisticians going through everything. So maybe I think that's a little theory. I'm not, I don't know if that necessarily gives any answers, but at least maybe just some positing about to why this could be. And it's just maybe a bit of an anomaly this week. But I think those are some factors in terms of, even with the Champions League, obviously they've scrapped away goals, haven't they? And I think one of the reasons for that is because I don't think it's as much relevant anymore in terms of it's not a huge disadvantage anymore playing away from home necessarily. But yeah, every single team, home team lost 2-1 except Kalmar. And the crazy thing is, Steve, there were some big teams who played at home this week as well. I mean, AIK played at home.
Yeah.
Of course, they've lost to the champions Häcken. Tough game for Henningberg, his first match in charge of OIK. They actually played quite well, took the lead. And then Häcken came back into it in the second half and a sort of slightly weakened Häcken. They were missing some key men, but still managed to get the win and a big boost to them in their hopes to retain the title. But if you look through the card, as you've just mentioned there, Malmö at home obviously lost. So IFK lost to the bottom side in the league. So it's not Norrköping even losing to Halmstad, where Halmstad were the underdogs in that game and pulled off a great win. Even Bromma-Poikina, they were probably the favourites going into this game against Degerfors. So it's not even as if it was like every big team was away from home. To explain it, it was genuinely just a bit of a crazy week.
Yeah, and Elfsborg winning 4-0. Now, they actually were the shortest price of all the away teams in action this round. So it's not exactly a shock, but it is a result, which means we have a new leader in the Allsvenskan. 35 points for Elfsborg now. Malmö losing against Mjällby at home means they have a 1-point lead. Häcken are back in the race again as well, perhaps. 32 points, although they played a game more than the top two. We have been waxing lyrical about Elfsborg recently, but this was another very accomplished performance, helped by a red card. Don't know what you thought about that red card, Jonathan, but 4-0 away. You can't knock that, can you?
You can't knock that at all, and you can't knock Elfsborg. I think I said it on Twitter after the game. It's definitely time to take them seriously as title contenders. Maybe going a little bit far to say favourites, Steve, but I think this was the first week where I think everyone will sit up and take notice of Elfsborg now and say they're going to be, any team's going to beat them is going to be in for a battle. Obviously, we're going to talk about Malmö in a minute and their shock defeat, but that obviously paved the way for Elfsborg to know that if they won their game, they played straight after them. They knew that with Malmö losing, if they were to win their game, they would go top, and they didn't hesitate or sweat at all, really. Comfortable 4-0 win. They were doing really well already before the red card. They look calm, Steve. They look like a sort of, the best way to describe it is Johan Larsson after the game looked like he hadn't even played a game of football. He when he did his post-match interview, cool as he like. It was almost like a manager giving an interview. That's how he looked. He looked like he was, a manager just comes out and strolls into the touchline. You wouldn't have thought he just played 90 minutes. He looked totally calm. He could have probably gone straight home and not take a shower. That's how dominant they were. Obviously the red card played a part in it. Don't want to knock Kalmar too much. Shout out to Wasson and over Peterson. I'm sure they were very disappointed. But the reality is, Steve, they were taken apart by arguably the best team in the league this season so far. I think you'd have to probably argue in every phase of the game they have an argument to be the best team in the league so far. Defensively, they've got the best defensive record in the league. Going forward, they obviously they've got the third best attacking record, but in terms of going forward, and they're no slouches. 34 goals scored in 14 games. They've only lost one match. And the game did sort of change a little bit with the red card to Ricardo Friedrich, our man, formerly on the pod. You can go back and listen to our interview with him. The Brazilian goalkeeper, he's a bit of a sweeper keeper, and the incident did happen when he sort of flew off his line to try and make an intervention, clattered into an Elfsborg player, and it was a red card. But they were already 1-0 up at that time through Niklas Hult, and then further goals from Jeppe Ockels, best for Zanelli, and that man Johan Larsson. Steve, I know you're a big fan of his. To wrap it up, basically, so Elfsborg are looking really good, and the one thing I would say about them is, from watching that Malmö game to watching the Elfsborg game, they look much more in control of the match than Malmö did. And I know it was a bit of a shock defeat, but even Malmö in recent games, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but there was a real calm and composure to Elfsborg in the way they played that was a bit of a contrast to how Malmö played against Mjällby, where it started to get a bit frantic. And even from the bench in the dugout, like, I have to say, Jimmy Tennant on the bench looks really comfortable at the moment. He looks really relaxed, looks really calm. He transmits that calm to the players. And I think it was definitely the weekend, Steve, we're about to hit the halfway point of the season. This was the weekend where you really sat up and thought to yourself, no Jacob Ondrejka as well. He's obviously gone to Belgium, their main man from the start of this season. This is the weekend where I really sat up and thought, what, Elfsborg, they're going to be in this title race.
Do you think Kalmar could have done much different in this game, or was it a case of they were just simply outclassed? Because Kalmar in the last sort of two and a half years have been, that's a tough place to go, no matter who's in charge of them. you're expecting a really tough battle at Kalmar. They've got a decent squad. They've had a decent season. They're still in the top 6. I honestly looked at this. It didn't surprise me that Elfsborg won, but I thought it's the sort of match where you may well drop some points because it's a tough place to go. But was it a case of just Elfsborg on the day way too good?
Yeah, just way too good, and the red card changed the complexion of the game. The thing with Kalmar, with their manager Jensen, I think I read a stat saying they're one of the best 2 teams in the league in terms of patterns of play, in terms of the connectivity between the team. So they're a team that really likes that possession style. I think they've tried to sort of replicate Reed Strummer, who left last season for Malmö, in their new manager, and I think he's gone for a similar sort of game model. He likes intricate build-up play, and they just couldn't get that side of the game going. They were very vulnerable on the break. It's no surprise that the 2 fullbacks, Hult and Larsen, both scored. Wide areas, Kalmar were kind of exposed on that counter attack, and I think that Kalmar having a decent season, but they do sort of they can be hit and miss. They're a bit unpredictable at times. Kalmar. It's hard to know if they're going to show up or if they're going to not show up. And obviously, the red card did change it, but Elfsborg haven't won the league since 2012. It's been a decade. And I have to say they are looking like the real deal, I think, to be honest. Probably the best performance I've seen this season, maybe up there with 1 or 2 others, but I know the red card affected it, but it was arguably one of the most complete performances of the season, just in terms of calmness. They just didn't look phased at any point in the match. And I think that's a massive credit to the club. As you mentioned, Kalmar are not having a bad season. I think the new managers come in and done quite well. They've got players who are sort of performing. I mean, I know Radjevic, for example, I was massive on him at the start of the season. He was in our 10 to watch, of course, and I rate him, but he's gone off the boil a little bit. Maybe in wide areas, just creativity-wise, they're not quite creating as much, maybe at times. And sometimes just that transition to defence is a little bit weak at times. They are susceptible maybe every now and then to conceding goals. But they are a solid team, so I agree. Didn't see a 4-0 coming. But obviously, once the red card came along, it was, and then kind of errors at the back for a couple of the goals as well. Just lack of composure, lack of marking, switching off, things like that. They showed a few weaknesses. Kalmar, a bit of a soft underbelly, and Elfsborg took full advantage of it, and credit to them.
Yeah, and the dangling carrot was there for Elfsborg to get to the top of the table, because earlier in the day, a huge shock result went down in Malmö. Probably the biggest shock result of the whole season so far. Malmö 1, Mjällby 2. I mean, I don't think many people saw this one coming, Jonathan. Malmö had won their last 3 games, combined 11-1 goal differential. They'd won 6 out of 7 home games before this contest. But Mjällby came to town, and, well, I personally thought they did a hell of a job on them, to be honest. What a result, what a performance. I know you got plenty to say about this game. Talk us through it.
Yeah, shock of the round for sure. I think people doing their fantasy teams were figuring out how they could pack as many Malmö players maybe into it as possible, because they were probably especially going into this, I think I saw maybe around 10-1, something like that, to win the match.
Yeah, they were the 10-1 is what they kicked off as. The biggest price away team of the whole round. Yeah,
they were completely written off essentially. But never write off Anders Torstensen and his boys. They pulled off a fantastic win. He's done it before. They beat Malmö in the 2021 season as well, away from home, on that amazing record, that run they had where they were sort of conceding, they didn't concede any goals, if you know what I mean. They nearly broke the Allsvenskan record, if you remember back to that 2021 season, Stephen. Of course, we had Mr. Torstensen on the podcast at that point. Mamadou Moro got a goal back in October 2021. So they have got history. Torstensen did say after the match, we enjoy our position as sort of the bogey team, Malmö's bogey team. And apparently there was a very rousing speech from Jesper Gustafsson before the match. He gathered the troops and said basically that we fight all our lives for games like this, playing in front of 20,000 supporters, just under 20,000 attendance. Mjällby are quite a small club, really. They're not a massive team by any stretch of the imagination. Pontus Jansson back in Allsvenskan for his return to Malmö as the returning king. He said we should never be losing to a team like Mjällby, but they did lose to a team like Mjällby, and it wasn't even a fluke. It was a completely controlled deserved win. If you look at it, Steve, they completely outplayed Malmö, actually. The first time I would say this season that Malmö have looked a little bit weak. There's been a lot of talk about Malmö, of course, with Rydström, the way they play, the fluidity. I know you're going to ask me maybe where it's gone wrong a little bit and what's happening, but they did show a few weaknesses in this game, Malmö. And Mjällby took advantage of them with, for me, one of the best tactical displays I've seen all season from Mjällby. I thought it was a masterclass tactically. The best performance of the season, I think, in terms of a tactical shock, a team going somewhere and dominating someone and winning. And of course, they picked up that 2-1 win, as you mentioned. Lofqvist with an early goal. Fenger then made it 2-0 before half time. Nanasi scored in the 96th minute, so it was, the game was almost done at that point. It was a bit of a sort of lucky late goal, really. But Malmö weren't really in this match at any point in the game. Brilliant performance from Mjällby.
No, they weren't. And it's interesting that I had quite a few people asking me about this game beforehand from a betting advice angle. And I said if Malmö don't win, it's probably going to be 0-0 or 1-1 perhaps at absolute best. I basically suggested that Mjällby would just come here, park the bus, be hard to break down, not really come to play football, but be quite anti-football and frustrate Malmö. But I've got to be honest, and I want to ask you about their offensive play in this game, because I was deadly impressed. They didn't just come here to sit back, did they? They actually came here to cause Malmö serious problems going forward. How did they manage to do that?
They sucker punched them, Stephen. Your analysis is spot on. If you were asking someone before the game, if you said before the game, Mjällby will win this match, how are they going to win it? You would have said they'll park the bus, they'll sit behind. IFK played Brommapojkarna last week, Steve, and we didn't really talk about too much, but they obviously Brandström's last game in charge of IFK, there was literally a bus behind the goal. The Brommapojkarna stadium's quite tight, and IFK's team bus was actually behind the goal. And you would have said that that's how Mjällby were going to win if they're going to beat Malmö away. It would be everyone back, camp in your box, do not leave your final third, deep block, boot everything into Rosenborg and just pray for the best. But it was not the case whatsoever, Steve. First goal, beautiful piece of play down the right-hand side, counter-attacking football, brilliant cross into the box and Lofqvist with a header, bullet header into the back of the net. The second goal was almost identical, Steve. It was came from a free kick, I think, or a corner set piece. Basically, they broke again. A lovely little play down the right-hand side, cross into the box again, and another finish this time, of course, like I said, Fenger. They actually outplayed them, in my opinion, Steve. I know when sometimes, you look at stats and things like that, you go and look at kind of like the match facts and you say, okay, well, they had, I think, 30% possession roughly, 7 shots to Malmö's 21. But you look at the XG, according to FotMob, XG for Mjällby was 1.21, XG for Malmö 1.49. So it's not a massive difference. 5 shots for Malmö on target to 4 shots for Mjällby. So this is, I know they've got no possession, but what they've done with it, it's been as efficient, more efficient in the end than Malmö. But I think what the interesting takeaway from this, Steve, and it's going to play into the final half of the season, I think this is a wake-up call for Malmö, in my opinion. Henrik Rydström said it himself. He said you can enter the final third a million times, but if you don't know what to do with it, then you've got no hope. And he said that we've learned in this game that we're a lot further behind them than I expected in terms of final third play. Now, there's 2 factors in this, which I'll come to, but I think the key thing to point out where this game was won, in my opinion. Now, everyone's been raving about Malmö's 3-4-3, right? We've all been talking about this new Malmö way, a bit like Pep Guardiola style, where you kind of like play one less defender, essentially, move one defender into the midfield zone, which is what they do with either Cisse or Busanello, and kind of overload that midfield. And then you've got those sort of like 3 forwards that can kind of interchange, and Nanasi, Taha Ali, Saidan, Vecchia, those sort of players, and they can just win you the game with a bit of magic. But what Torstensen did in this game is he completely outthought like the 3-4-3 for 2 reasons, right? Well, number one, look at the back 3 of Malmö. They got Moisander, who's 36, 37 now, 37 years old, centre back. They only play 1 centre back, Steve. Moisander's the only centre back on the pitch. 2 goals come from headers, so already you can figure that out and understand that. You've got Olsen at the back, and then you've got Busanello as a sort of centre back who pushes into the midfield. a left back essentially. And then you've got Cisse, who's the right back, but he basically is a right wing back. So what did Torstensen do, Steve? Now, the key with Malmö this season, why they've been so strong, Busenello's arguably been one of the best players in the league this season, I think. Malmö's left back. And a lot of their players come from that left-hand side. Busenello linking up with Nanasi, linking up with Vecchia, linking up with Taha Ali, and getting crosses into the box and that kind of thing. What Torstensen did in this game is he overloaded that right-hand side, and he basically shifted all his defenders to that side and just said, we're going to defend the right-hand zone. If the ball comes to the left-hand zone, in other words, if Malmö have it down their right-hand side with Cisse, we're fine with that. They don't consider Cisse as much of a threat as Busenello and Nanasi on that left-hand side. So they were like, fine, you can keep the ball on the right-hand side. We're going to overload this side of the pitch. And what that did, Steve, is it meant that Mjällby, whenever the ball broke, they actually had more men in the central midfield zone than Malmö. Because the 3-4-3, of course, you've got two midfielders, Oscar Lewicki and Peña. Soren Reeks is out on the left-hand side. He can cut inside, but he wasn't doing that because he's out kind of trying to help Busenello and them sort of play. So number one, that was a key. They actually were overloading on the counter-attack, which meant they could get out of their midfield, get crosses into the box with the likes of Lofkis, the likes of Fenger, and the lack of height in that box for Malmö. They've got one centre-back. That's where the two goals came from, crosses into the box. So really, they've taken Malmö's strengths and turned them into weaknesses, essentially, because they're so good down that left, but they've completely throttled that left side. And they've said, you have it down the right, and we'll deal with that, and we'll counter-attack you. And the fact that you're playing three defenders, we're gonna, we think that's arrogant. We're gonna pepper crosses into your box and take advantage of the crosses into the box with the aerial height that we have. The second factor, Steve, obviously a mitigating circumstance for Malmö is the injuries they've got and the fact that they've been a bit unlucky, Malmö, as well. And this is the key point for me, is like, this is going to decide now the rest of the season, and this is going to be a key part of the title race. How do Malmö recover from Christensen and Hugo Larsson departing that midfield zone? Obviously, Christensen with a heart problem, that's something you can't foresee. It's really unlucky for him, and we wish him a speedy recovery, but he's out for the rest of the season. Larsson's gone to Frankfurt for 12 million euros. They played in this game with Lewicki and Peña, who are comfortably much lower, much weaker as players than Larsson and Christensen. Peña was okay, but I think personally, he's lucky he's not be in prison at the end of the day with his drink driving charge. Reeks, and my final point, Steve, I know we're going to, interested to get your thoughts as well on it, but my final point just on that, and that point about the weakness of the squad, there's three players in this game, Steve, that I think this was possibly their last chance under Rydström at Malmö. Zidane taken off in the 59th minute, Lewicki taken off in the 59th minute, and Reeks taken off in the 59th minute. Now, with the signings of Jorgensen, the signing of obviously Otto Rosengren, and of course Pontus Jansson, and Malmö still looking for players. I personally, when they came off the pitch, Steve, in my opinion, I was thinking this might be the last time we see these three in a Malmö shirt or as a regular. I'm not sure we'll see Reeks. I'm not sure we'll see Zidane. It's already been rumoured that AIK wants to sign Zidane. Lewicki's a bit of a, he's an Allsvenskan sort of, he's been around the block. He's only 30, but I just wonder in the back of my mind, is that the last we might see of them as kind of first choice regulars? Because I think Rydström was very disappointed with some of the players in this game. I feel like he gave Reeks, Zidane and Lewicki a bit of a prove what you can do in this match, and they've come up short really. And I just wonder if that might be them on the out now, because I would imagine the likes of Jorgensen might get into the team now ahead of them.
Yeah, well said. Some very, very interesting points there. I have to say, I think it was one of the best performances I've seen from a significant underdog in any league game across the world in a long time. I've got to give massive credit to Anders Torstensen, who, I've always been a big fan of his work anyway, but even I underestimated him a bit here, because I think Malmö came into this game and they definitely underestimated Mjällby. I think they expected quite an easy game. They've been dominating so many matches of late that they thought they could just turn up and win fairly easily. The goals that they conceded were no fluke, because there was these pockets of space that these players from Mjällby managed to get headers in. It wasn't just that, the lack of height in the Malmö area. They were unmarked at times. So I think Torstensen's had a fantastic game plan. And the other problem, I've got a problem with Malmö's tactics as well, because it just felt to me, I don't know about you, it's like they've got what they play one way, right? And don't get me wrong, it's worked really well this season. When it works, it's superb. But is there a plan B? Is there a plan C? I don't think there was any of that in this game. They couldn't adapt at all. There was no real changes. Anything that, to be fair, anything they did try, the Mjällby soon counteracted it. So, you know, huge credit. And does this, you're right, does it raise questions about Malmö? You know, it's a lovely system when it works, but do they need to be potentially more adaptable going into the future, do you think?
Yeah, I know your next question is gonna be about Ponsianza, so we'll deal with him in a minute. But I do agree with you. I think this is why I think now after I think this is why Elfsborg's win was so significant, because I really genuinely think that was a laying down the marker, because Malmö have shown that basically what happened in this game, Steve, Anders Torstensen has laid the blueprint for how to beat Malmö. As simple as that. He's laid the blueprint. Now every other team watching this from now on, before that, Malmö were like this sort of almost inevitable, they're going to win the league. Every team that went there, they get battered. A feeling of like sort of you know when those sort of title winning teams, they just got that momentum and people start to fear playing them. That it was getting to that point with Malmö, but Torstensen's laid the blueprint here for how to beat them. You know, you mentioned crosses into the box. I mean, if you look at the stats, they had 5 accurate crosses in this game, Mjällby, to Malmö's 6 accurate crosses, but their completion rate of crosses is 45% against Malmö's 18%. So their crosses into the box are far better. So that's an avenue for teams maybe to get at Malmö in the future. And as you mentioned, Rydström said it after the game himself. He was not happy with how easy it was to play against them in their final third entries. And what tends to happen, Steve, with Malmö is they sort of it was when Taha Ali came on. I felt it was like they have like an emergency break glass thing. It's like if everything's going wrong, emergency break glass, bring Taha Ali on, and he's just a chaos provider. He started to unlock the game. It was literally like every single time they got the ball, it was like play out to that left wing to Taha Ali and just hopefully he does something. It almost got to that point. It was almost desperation. He was just doing whatever he could, and he's such a good player that like he did unbalance Mjällby actually almost single-handedly, but there was just no one really to get on the end of chances, and it wasn't quite coming off because they packed that right hand side, as I mentioned, Torstensen, with the likes of Gustafsson, the likes of Herman Johansson, the other Gustafsson, obviously, and Noah Eiler as well on loan from Malmö. He had a really good game at centre back, and he did himself no harm in that match in terms of maybe returning to Malmö next season. But yeah, I think that the reason we're talking about this game so long, it's not only that it was probably Malmö's worst game of the season. It's not only the fact that kind of the tactical masterclass from Torstensen, but I think it's laid the blueprint for Malmö now in terms of other teams to beat them. I just wonder, Steve, like, is this, you know, they're going to have to find a way around this, and are they going to go into the transfer market and maybe bring some people in? Obviously, Rosenborg has come in now. He'll replace Hugo Larsson, I imagine, as a centre midfielder. But how will he adapt? How will he settle in? They're now 1 point behind Elfsborg with, you know, nearly halfway point of the season. So, yeah, it's going to be really fascinating to see. And Rydström was clearly not happy after the game. He said that they kind of lack a plan B, like you said, and he kind of said that it's well and good getting into the final third, but if you don't know what to do with it, then he said we're a lot further behind than I expected. So I think there's a lot to come from this. And well, I won't wait for your question. In terms of Pontus Jansson, obviously the big talking point before the game was his return to Allsvenskan. You know, the Leeds man, Brentford man, he's a big hero at Malmö. He's always been clear about being a Malmö fan. Steve, I don't know if you remember it when we did a Twitter Periscope about 4 or 5 years ago when I went to Chelsea Malmö.
Yeah.
And who was leading the away fans into the stadium? It was Pontus Jansson, who took a day off from I think it was Leeds at the time maybe, and literally got in trouble from the club because he basically took the day off to go and support Malmö essentially, and he got I think he got a fine, didn't he, for missing training. So he's a loved player at Malmö. They love him, but yeah, he was only on for a few minutes, so he didn't really get to make much of an impact. But not the best of returns to Allsvenskan for him. Obviously, he ended the game chucking the ball at someone's head after the match because he was so annoyed. So, yeah, not a good day for Malmö.
No, it wasn't. And just before we finish on them, you're absolutely right that the amount of times they try and get Busanello and Nanasi on the ball is incredible. but they were so congested in this game, like Busanello, whenever he was crossing it, he didn't have much time and he couldn't aim for anyone because it was such a cramped position. I've got to say, personally, I was a little bit disappointed in Isaac Kieser-Tellin, who might be a bit of a flat track bully, you know. It felt like his positioning was not good enough in this game. You know, it's like when he was actually faced against someone different, a tougher sort of opponent, I'm not saying he couldn't be asked, but he was just frustrated that his normal game plan didn't work. And again, I just think sometimes you can get sucked, can't you? They've been winning games so easily that it becomes almost a presumption that a team like Mjällby, in Pontus Jansson's words, are just going to be there for the taking. So a big wake-up call for them coming up soon. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they respond, Jonathan.
Yeah, massively. And I think we also have to give a bit of an honourable mention to David Lofquist as well. I think he was really, really good on the day. I mean, you talk about Kieser-Tellin there, but Lofquist led the line sensationally. He got a goal and an assist. Not only did he take his header really well, but he put in a beautiful cross for Fenger's goal as well. So he showed he could do a bit of both. So yeah, really a really good all-round game for them. And I think watch this space with Malmö, because obviously they're missing Cornelius at centre back. Maybe Cornelius and Janssen might be the centre back pairing going forward. Maybe they'll look to try and move things around a bit. But yeah, I definitely think there's a lot to think about for Rydström now. And with Elfsborg taking the lead in the title race, it's going to be interesting to see. They don't really look like a team that's going to drop a huge amount of points the way it's looking at the moment. So Malmö looks like we all expected kind of Malmö to walk the title, didn't we? At one point, it looks like they still probably are my favourites, but it looks like now they are going to have maybe a bit of a battle, and we're not even including Häcken in that yet.
Yeah, I'm actually going to pull rank here a little bit and stray from the suggested schedule, because Häcken, you're right, they're in third place, and there's a few things to say about them this week, isn't there? Because they've obviously had a good win against IFK. They'll be very happy Malmö lost, and they're in the Champions League as well, first ever time against TNS. They're involved in the transfer market, and we've also got a bonus Patreon content to talk about regarding Häcken. Let's talk about them. I mean, they're involved. They're the only team actually involved from Allsvenskan and Elitserien in Europe this week against the New Saints. We briefly mentioned it, didn't we, on the last show? Yeah, this is obviously big for them. Is there any expectation that they can go on a deep run in this Champions League qualifying? Would a good result ultimately be if they could qualify for the Conference League group stage?
A good result would be Champions League group stages. Malmö did it a few years ago. Why not? Häcken's team is as good as anyone's over the last sort of 3-4 years. They're arguably the best champions we've seen for a while. Maybe they're a bit more naive than maybe Thomason's Malmö, but if you get a luck of the draw, who knows? It's going to be an intriguing one. The game's actually going to be broadcast on British TV. I think it's on Segoria or C4S or whatever it's called. So listeners will be able to tune into that in the UK, potentially watch the game. I certainly will have a look and see if I can grab hold of that.
Is that Welsh channel?
Yeah, I think it's S4C or something like that, which I think it is free to air in the UK.
I watched Croatia-Wales on that.
Yeah, I think you can also get it on YouTube or Facebook, something for free. So, definitely worth tuning in. Yeah, Häcken done fantastically well to beat AIK away, I think, from 1-0 down. It was a sort of game where once they went 1-0 down, I thought this is going to, after the draw with Norrköping, I thought they're going to be under ropes there. Henningberg's first game, the fans were sort of up for it a little bit more. Debut goal for their new signing, Ty Chosen, from Michelin, I think it is, or from Denmark anyway. He looked decent, a decent strike. And you thought to yourself, with a weakened Häcken team, to be Asano back in the team for the first time in a year, obviously since his long injury. No Benny Traore, of course, the man who we've done a Patreon blog on. He unfortunately had a family bereavement apparently, and had to fly back home. We've got a Patreon on him this week, player analysis, obviously linked with Celtic, linked with Rangers. Has he played his last game for Häcken? We're not sure yet, but he was missing. So they played Sadiq up front, and it was a bit of a weaker forward line, as I say. Udenas started as well, but they came back well. Sadiq got a goal. He gave a little bit to Milosevic when he scored. He was sort of going like this too when he ran off and celebrated. They had a bit of a I think there was a bit of verbals going on in the AIK and Häcken forward line, which I always enjoy. And then, of course, obviously, so he scored the winner, but Rigard obviously equalised as well. So they did brilliantly to come back. They're going to have to balance Champions League for the first time, of course, see how that goes. Is that going to affect team selection? Do they have the squad to deal with it? We are hearing reports, Steve. Very keen to hear your opinion on Layuni. Obviously, he's moved to Häcken now. It's almost official. I think it's been made official this evening, actually. So clearly, if Traore does leave, that they're looking at their forward options. It was very interesting to me, Steve, that when I think it was Sadiq or one of the forwards went off, they didn't bring on Ola Kamara. It looks like he's been a total flop. They brought on Trusevski, who's like a U team player, I believe, and Kamara just looks like out on the odds. It doesn't look like he's really going to be there much longer. Looks like he's totally out of the picture. So they do need another forward. I think if they're going to compete for the title, then especially if Traore leaves, they're in big trouble really in the forward areas. So really good win, but I think there are going to be issues juggling both things. But listen, Steve, on their day, Häcken is still a class. That midfield is up there with the best we've seen in Allsvenskan for a while. You know, the two Gustafssons and Rigard. None of them should really be in Allsvenskan. They're all well above Allsvenskan level. So I would argue that they, as long as they can get a decent draw, they should be okay. But we saw them play Aberdeen, didn't we? Not too long ago, and struggle there, didn't they, in that one? But that was a very different Häcken side. So let's see how it goes. But I'm looking forward to this one, and I'm sure the fans are going to be buzzing to hear that Champions League anthem.
Yeah, I think they are I think they're a lot different now compared to when they faced that Aberdeen team. And that Aberdeen team went on to have a terrible season, by the way. I always remember, I was like, how the hell did they beat Häcken in Europe that year? It was really weird how that happened. But Häcken, you're right. We've done that Patreon piece on Benny Traore, NFP player analysis for 2023. We did some of them pieces last year. I can reveal that there is another one going to be released to the patrons this week on an elitizarian striker. Is there anyone you want us to cover? Send your requests in and we will do these analytical pieces for the Patreon. So send us any suggestions if you want. Amor Layuni. Do you know what? I don't actually think he's that good. He's all right. He's decent. Very much an inside forward on the left-hand side, massively right-footed. He's got a bit of flair. He's got a bit of skill about him, but sometimes he's a bit what I call a hot air player where his end product isn't there, and he's frustrating to watch. Doesn't always finish his chances that well, but look, he did have a loan spell out in Australia. I can't remember what club he was at, but he fell out with Dog Fergoma Vålerenga, and that spell in Australia might have done him some good. It's a very high scoring league down there, and I'm sure he managed to flex his attacking muscles, and he's probably padded up his stats decently. He's not a bad squad player to have around, I must say. He gives good depth. He can start or make an impact off the bench, but he's certainly not a striker. He's very much a wide player who cuts inside.
Yeah, good stuff. And I think he's going to be eligible for European football as well. He's 30 years old. Looks like a 3-year contract. And the club have said that he's an experienced player with a great offensive record and a good physique. He can play in several positions, but he starts mainly, as you've mentioned, the left or from the right wing. He's been around the block, hasn't he? He's played in Egypt. He's played in Australia. He's also played for Glimt, Degerfors, Braga. So he's been around.
Pyramids, wasn't it? Pyramids was his team in Egypt.
Yeah, 24 goals, 26 assists in 99 games in Elitserien. So, not a bad record, but let's see how it goes. Because one thing's for sure, I think Häcken do need some reinforcements in forward areas, especially if Benny Traore leaves. And as you just mentioned there correctly, Steve, if you do have any suggestions you want to see on our Patreon for player analysis, don't forget to tweet us at Nordic Footpod or on the YouTube channel. Leave a comment. We'll get on it. But stay tuned this week because we've got a juicy one from Steve that we're going to be doing and putting out there on the Patreon as well. So we'll have another player analysis for you in the next few days.
And this is now a very juicy looking title battle. I must say, I'm very excited when I look at the top end of the elite of the Allsvenskan table. Honestly, it looked like a Malmö shoe-in for me after 7 or 8 games. But now we've got what may well be a genuine 3-horse race. It's really exciting times, I must say. So excellent stuff. as we head towards the halfway stage of the season in Sweden. Down at the bottom of the table, incredibly, both IFK Göteborg and IFK are in the relegation zone. Degerfors with a really important win for them away against Brommapojken and moves them to 14 points. IFK on 10. IFK and Varberg are now on 8 points each after a basement battle win for Varberg. 2-1 on Monday night. I've watched this game. I don't know how much you've seen of it, Jonathan, but I was absolutely appalled by IFK in this fixture. Totally deserved win for Varberg, their first win of the season. Have they even got a manager? I think they might be managerless still. But they've got the massive 3 points and a terrible, terrible result for IFK.
Yeah, I saw you close to tears on Twitter earlier. So not a good day for you. And we've had some listener questions that I don't know if you're on them, but we did have a listener comment from, I think it's Football Weekender, was
Football Weekender. Yeah.
He says, at Football Weekender, he asked, what's are Blavitt going down? How does their number one fan feel about their prospects of survival? We also had who will take the blame when IFK go down. That was Nicholas Nielsen Bean. Keep on the listener question, Steve. I mean, we're going to talk about one player in particular. I want to give him a quick mention to. It's been all over our timeline this evening. But I didn't actually see this game. I was watching Norrköping Halmstad. Big win for Halmstad, by the way. Late win there. Norrköping went down to 10 men. Two teams we haven't really spoken about a huge amount lately. But shocking from IFK. And as you mentioned there, I mean, you famously tweeted tonight that you think they'll be relegated. And it's Varberg. The key point to mention is it's Varberg boys' first win of the season. So they had to break the duck at some point, and they've done it away from home against their closest rival at the bottom of the league. And it's actually a massive win in the relegation battle, Steve, because when you tweet, you actually texted me saying, I think IFK will go down. And I kind of dismissed it in my mind. I was like, they're not going to go down. Like, you're just being an overreactive fan. But I'm looking at the table now, and they're level on points with Varberg. They're 2 points behind IFK, who you'd imagine with a new manager, surely they're going to improve slightly. The next team above them is Degerfors. They're 6 points behind Degerfors and Sirius. Who exactly are they going to catch? Maybe Sirius, maybe Degerfors, but if they're losing to Varberg, who are below them, I mean, they're down level on points for them, Steve. Maybe they could they actually be relegated? I mean, you watched the game.
Yeah, this game was one that I fully expected IFK Göteborg to win comfortably. To be honest, I've seen a fair bit of Varberg this season, and I mean, no offense here, that they're not a very good footballing team. They're just not. They're a physical unit. They don't play much football, and I'd be very surprised if Varberg stay up. IFK should be beating these sort of teams definitely at home and fairly easily. But apart from the first 5 minutes where they started well, I think Varberg dominated the game. They legitimately outplayed them. Wasn't even close. I think IFK, they hadn't had a shot on target by the 80th minute, which is absolutely diabolical. I think Varberg showed more fight. I think Varberg showed a better tactical game plan. But even more worryingly, I actually think Varberg boys showed far more quality on the ball. IFK just didn't have any ball technicians who were playing very well in this game. It was a massive concern how I just looked, sometimes you look at a team in whatever league you're watching and you just really, really, really worry for them. And I watched that tonight and I'm thinking that team's going to go down because they couldn't handle the pressure of the crowd. Those players don't deserve the fans. And the fans were behind them for most of the game still. They booed them off, but that the crowd are really behind them. And I think it's adding too much pressure to the players. But then they fell behind and I'm thinking, you know what, maybe the shackles will come off now. They don't, the pressure's off a little bit. They have to attack, but it didn't get any better. Varberg were by far the better team. And if you're getting outplayed by them at home, I think they've got major problems. I think the only way out, Jonathan, is 4 or 5 players coming in because that 11 out there today, that's not good enough. I mean, Marcus Berg looks done. He came off at half-time. He was hardly in the game. There's so much other stuff I could say here, but I will refrain. But that team, I'm being serious here, and I'm not being an overreactive fan. I am going to be looking out for the odds. Whoever posts them up, IFK Göteborg to go down. And if they're not odds on to go down, I'll be backing them to be relegated, because they should be. I just don't see how two teams finish below IFK Göteborg right now. I just don't. That was an absolute shambles.
The funny thing is, it's like you're sort of licking your lips at the prospect of the odds on them going down, whilst you got tears in your eyes. It's like you don't know whether to rub your belly or cry.
This year, I could see it coming with my own team, Leeds United, this year, and everyone was saying, "Oh, you'll be all right. You'll be all right." I could see it coming. I can see it coming now. I mean, there are 16 games left, and they can still buy players, but that,
Well, we haven't even talked about. I mean, we haven't actually spoken about their new manager, Jens Bertolascu. By the way, congratulations, former guest on the pod. You know, we interviewed him when he was in the Faroe Islands. He's now in charge of one of the biggest teams in Sweden, but unfortunately for him, his record so far is not great. He's had obviously the summer break, to work on them. He joined for the serious game in June that ended with the fans confronting the chairman and Hakan Mild and the players. This game as well has ended with them confronting the players. Actually, Steve, it got quite ugly. Well, not ugly, but after the game, the set of fans waited outside the stadium for IFK's players, and they had a meeting. According to Hakan Mild, it was a constructive meeting. Apparently, there were 3 official IFK spokespeople on behalf of the fans who spoke calmly, but according, they did not mince their words, obviously, and they wanted to have frank talks. Matt Mild said that obviously these fans, they support us all the time, and we do owe them something. So good luck to Jens, obviously there, former guest on the podcast. He's obviously done well for himself, hasn't he, going from Faroe Islands to Denmark to IFK, and we've been on his journey since day one. So that was a good spot from us in terms of a management. But yeah, he's not won a game yet. Obviously, 1 draw, 2 defeats, but it's still early days. You mentioned the signings; they have signed quite a few players already, Steve. Thomas Santos made his debut tonight. He signed from Horsens, which is Jens Bertolascu's former club, so obviously he clearly knows him. But 5 goals in 66 games for Horsens. They also brought in a couple of other players. Arben Macaulay, he came on at halftime, I think, for Berg, a 23-year-old Albanian forward. He's come from Vejle in Denmark. I don't know how to pronounce that, but football in DK. Probably do a better job pronouncing it. But they are active in the market, Steve. One player I want to talk about, though, is Pontus Dahlberg. I think I tweeted something earlier about him, howler for that first goal. And we've had a lot of... I tweeted something about his move to Watford, obviously, for £4 million, a goalkeeper. And, I mean, Steve, it wasn't a great goal, was it, to concede that first goal? You're a goalkeeper, but the reaction we've seen from Gillingham fans in particular, who obviously watched him on loan, several loan spells, it's not too positive on Pontus Dahlberg.
Well, I'm actually going to defend him, because he made 2 or 3 really good saves in this game, especially one in the first half, which was a brilliant reaction stop. He kept it at 1-0 for quite some time. Unfortunately, the goal is probably on him. You can't palm it away like that. You've got to do better handling, which is a shame. But he actually, if you look at the game overall, that just shows you how bad it could have been for IFK. Dahlberg could have scored 3 or 4 goals here, Jonathan. But it has been a real... with his career, it's a shame, because obviously he was a massive talent, and he got that great move to Watford. I think I remember you questioned him at the time whether was it the right moment for him to leave Sweden, certainly to that sort of club. And do you think he left the country too early?
It's a good question, and it's a fact that you it's good that you're defending him. I think that's good. I think that I'm actually quite surprised at the amount of abuse he's got from Gillingham fans. I mean, we've had one person describe him as one of the worst goalkeepers he's ever seen at Gillingham. He said he had holes. That Lee Ludlow 3 says he had holes in his hands. There's actually quite a few quite negative comments from Gillingham fans, which I'm a little bit surprised about, to be fair, because I've always really rated him. Yeah, I didn't really expect it. Craig Hewing Everett says he's called the Mermaid worst keeper to ever play in a Gills shirt. These sort of comments, I think, are a bit surprising. I mean, just to give a bit of background on Pontus Darberg, it's good that you said that he made some good saves in this match. He was massively rated when I was in Gothenburg. Coming through as a goalkeeper, he was being watched by tons of teams in Europe. Quite a few of them obviously turned him down, but Watford came in and paid $4 million. But this is a wider debate that I just want to quickly pick up on before we move to part two. I mean, it's something that fascinates me. Player development. Did he leave Allsvenskan too early? I mean, he was around for quite a while, to be fair to him. It wasn't like a sort of Benjamin Negan situation, where he plays 10 games and leaves. He was around for quite a while, but what was the value of moving to Watford, Steve, from his career point of view, right? Imagine you're playing in front of EFK fans, 18,000 fans a week, every week. You're a son of Gothenburg, you know what I mean? Like you're playing for a team you've grown up playing for. And then you get signed by Watford and you just go and play under 23s football. And next thing you know, Steve, I mean, I couldn't believe it once when I saw him in goal for Doncaster Rovers. You know what I mean? Next thing you know, you're playing in like League One. He's had loans at Gillingham. He's been all over the place. I mean, had loan at Hacken. I mean, is there anyone seriously, Steve? Is there anyone who sums up the rise of fall of Gothenburg football more than Pontus Darby? He went to Hacken as sort of like a favour. And he's come back and they're champions and EFK could be relegated. Like it's a massive. He almost sums up the turnaround in fortunes between the two teams, and it was considered quite a controversial thing when he moved on loan to Hacken from an EFK point of view. But you could argue now he actually went to the bigger team and came back to the smaller team. Like there's been a massive turnaround in Gothenburg football, and I just wonder from a player development point, Steve. I want to get your opinion on this. Like from my point of view, has it actually benefited his career going to Watford for that £4 million? Because obviously he's made EFK a lot of money, but he's right back where he started. He's now obviously older, and he's kind of been passed around the EFL. Doncaster, Gillingham, he's had loans at different places, never really played many games for Watford, if any. I don't think he ever played a first team game for Watford in the Premier League. Has that actually hindered his career? And what's the long-term effects of that? The other interesting point there, Steve, is I thought Warner Hahn was a really good goalkeeper last year, and the treatment of him, EFK just basically almost let him go for no reason. They brought back Darberg during the season when Warner Hahn was actually playing quite well and looked like a really good signing from the Netherlands. He was really disappointed at the way it was handled, his exit, and you could almost argue was Darberg an upgrade on Warner Hahn? I'm not sure. Steve, it's a club that you have grown to like. It's quite similar to Leeds, another relegation battle with a big support. So it seems like you do know how to pick a football team. What's your take on that situation? Because obviously, like you said, he made some good saves, and sometimes it's just a headline. But from my point of view, I just wondered, it is hard for players because if a club accepts a bid for you, at the end of the day, there's an expectation that you leave. If you're comfortable at your hometown club, a lot of the time you're going to be pressured to leave. It's not you almost don't have a choice really. They're going to say, listen, we're accepting $4 million, you have to leave. They're not going to say, if you want to stay. Finances at the end of the day dictate a lot of football, and I think sometimes players don't really have much of a choice, which is a shame really, because look at Tonali at the moment at Newcastle, from AC Milan. He's like a Milan, apparently according to all reports, like he's a Milan fan through and through, never wants to leave Milan, and according to the reports I've read, it's sort of like the club have kind of just taken the money on someone who's probably like Milan born and bred and wants to stay there for his whole career. We don't really live in a financial era, do we, in football now, Steve, of like, we want to keep our hometown players. Look at Mason Mount, for example, as another example. Like it feels like 20 years ago when we had like the Pirlos and the Maldinis and players like that. It doesn't happen anymore, really, does it, Steve? But often that's from the club point of view, more so than the player. But did this actually benefit his career, Pontus Darberg? And what are your thoughts on that whole thing? Because from my point of view, going to a big Premier League team, great. Watford at the time were in the Premier League. But if you're never going to play a game for them and you're going to be loaned out to sort of Gillingham, with all due respect to Gillingham, this was an international player. He was someone who's considered going to play for Sweden. It's almost damaged his reputation to the point where he seems like he's struggling to ever get his career back on track, if that makes sense. If even Gillingham fans are sort of ridiculing him.
Yeah, I think a lot depends on the club that you end up at, and I think he's been a bit unlucky there. Perhaps he was forced onto Watford, but Watford, can you think of any players that go to Watford and come out? better. They've been serious. I think they're a mess of a club. I think they're the way that they get run. Both on and off the pitch. I think it's a bit of a mess. And
I'll answer it. I'll say Richarlison just to balance it out because I shouldn't have laughed really. That was a bit unfair on Watford. But I'm not. The thing is, you're right. Just before you go on, you are right because I remember when you left, Steve. Watford had about 5 goalkeepers at the time. He wasn't even close to being number 2, let alone number 1. They had a lot of goalkeepers in their books at that point. I remember it because I was thinking, how is he even going to get on the bench, let alone in the first team? So I think it's a fairly valid point, although I shouldn't. No disrespect to Watford fans, I'm not laughing at the club. It was just your phrasing was quite comical.
I think if you're a goalkeeper, you've got to have assertive guarantees of playing time. And if you're not the number 1, then you know where you're going to be going, perhaps on a set loan already, or you know you're going to play cup games. There's another goalkeeping comparison we can actually use. That is Isak Pettersson, who went to Toulouse. And, that didn't work out for him. But the difference is I don't think his actual game has been affected too negatively because the surroundings at the Toulouse Football Club are a lot better. Good coaching, much better run. And, it just happened to be, that he was, he was second best at that club. He had a very good goalkeeper in Maxime Dupé at that point. But I think you've got to be really careful as a keeper. There's no doubt he would have been well paid. Let's not forget about that. You can't turn down life-changing money. But does that sometimes make you less hungry? Do you lose a little bit of drive, a little bit of motivation? You've kind of reached not the top, but you've reached a really good financial part of your career. Sometimes you lose that hunger, and now he's got to rebuild himself again. And that, a lot of sport, a lot of life is in the head, and that could be where he's struggling a bit. And it's a shame to see. And now every single mistake that he makes is going to be highlighted because he's under pressure from what's happened in the last few years.
Yeah, it's a fascinating debate. I'd love to get your thoughts. Tweet us if you do listen to this. Let us know your thoughts on those sort of moves. Does it benefit the player? You mentioned their life-changing money and stuff like that. It's true at the end of the day. I mean, Jens Bartlasky came out after the game and said we made too many errors. In the final third, we need to be more sharp. Obviously, he's brought in a few youth players. Lucas Carhead, I think he's looked quite lively. I quite like Linus Karlstrand as well, but you're right. The only thing I noticed in the second half of this game, because I did tune in for a bit of the second half, I thought Varberg looked a lot bit more organised than I've ever seen before. So I think that is interesting to look at going forward, like with the loss of their manager. And obviously at the moment they're looking for a new manager. That I'm curious to see how they sort of develop from here. Is that going to maybe turn their season around? But before we wrap up, I mean, just looking at his loans, Steve, I mean, he joined Watford in 2018 for 3.9 million euros. He then was loaned out to the Dutch League, FC Emmen. I think that's the second tier. Then he was loaned to Hacken. Then he was loaned to Doncaster, as I say. Then he was loaned to Gillingham. And then eventually EFK signed him on an undisclosed transfer last summer. So, he's still a young goalkeeper, to be fair. He's still only 24. That's very young for a goalkeeper. But as I say, I thought Juan Hahn was doing a really good job at EFK last season. I thought he was one of the best keepers in the league actually last season, personally. But yeah, it seems. I mean, we did have a comment from one listener who said someone on Twitter, when I did ask that same question, he did say that it's in line with the decision making of the club. He said the decision isn't odd; it's perfectly in line with all the other wrong decisions the club has made. And as you know, Steve, I was in Gothenburg a couple of months ago. Very much enjoyed it, and there's some very good people at that football club. There's no doubt about that. But they are in a bit of trouble at the moment because, as I said before, they're starting to get a little bit adrift. So they've got a massive job in their hands. Let's see where they go in the window. But for now, Steve, don't worry too much. Let's see how it goes. Nearly the
I do actually just want to give a shout out to Varberg in this game. They deserved the win. They played very well, especially Dion Krasniqi up front, got the 2 goals for them. He was very much on hand for the poachers finish for the first goal. And then it was a good finish for the second. I don't really know an awful lot about him. He has scored one other goal this season, but perhaps he looked positionally, he was getting into some really good spots. So I don't know whether that's something new, a new directive there at Varberg. There's no doubt before tonight, they have been an absolute shambles this season as well. They have, and they would admit it. But maybe for them, that's a turning point and they can kick on. But there's absolutely IFK Göteborg. They're in big trouble. Big trouble.
I think that'll be it for part one. We've had a bumper of sort of discussion here in the Allsvenskan, but it was long overdue. There's quite a few big talking points this week, so I hope you bear with us. And also, thanks to the listener questions, FPL Park Life, at Martinos657, who did ask us about Layuni. Forgot to give him a shout out, but hopefully we answered your question there. In part two, we're going to talk about a few things. I mean, we've got another big team who could be relegated. We're also going to sort of talk about a few surprise packages in Norway. So stay tuned for part two, and we'll be back after this short break. Welcome to part two of this week's episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. My name is Jonathan Vadu. I'm joined by Steve Wiss as ever. Quite a long part one, but it was very necessary to have a deep dive. We do like a deep dive every now and then on this podcast. I hope you enjoyed them too. We'll be sort of getting to the meat and bones of some teams, whilst we try and obviously balance the length of the show. Hopefully, if you listen to both sections, maybe you can break it up if you prefer one country to the other. Hopefully, we give you full value for both, but we're always looking for your feedback. So if you want to tweet us at Nordic Foot Pod or leave a comment on YouTube, we always love to hear from you and just hear your thoughts on some of the topics we discuss and the depth of the conversations that we have. One good thing about Twitter, obviously, and Steve, I noticed on YouTube we passed 500 subscribers, so congratulations on that. Thank you to everyone who subscribed on YouTube. But one thing on Twitter that's good about it is we do get a lot of listener questions, and that's where we're going to start with Norway. We've got a question from Spongy at Spongy_, who says, and this is where we're going to start Norway, are Godset now a dark horse for a medal place? And that is Strom's Godset now. The reason for asking that, obviously, they are currently sat in 7th place, but having a pretty decent season, Steve. Let's just recap what's been going on and give us your thoughts on that first question.
The answer to the question is yes. Yes, I think they are a dark horse for a medal position. I've said many times that I now believe that Bodø/Glimt will win the league. I think Molde will finish second. But I've mentioned a few times that I think the bronze medal spot is up for grabs. I think there's quite a few teams that could finish third this year. And I think Godset, there's no reason why they can't believe to be one of those potentially in the mixer as well. They've suddenly found some form in terms of results. We knew they were going to have a massive tactical transitional change heading into this season. And I think finally the players are getting used to that now with their new manager, and 4 wins in a row. They are definitely trending very much upwards.
What do you put that down to? What's going on at this club? Why are you so optimistic on them? Because obviously, just on face value, they are 7th. They have had a good sort of few weeks, as you mentioned there. I mean, I'll just read out some of the scores before you answer that question from the weekend just gone. Obviously, we've got Hamkam 2, Arlesen 1, Viking 2, Haugesund 0, Odd 0, Bodø/Glimt 2, Rosenborg 1, Lillestrøm 2, which was a big talking point, part of the 1-2 gang for joining Allsvenskan results. Sandefjord 0, Stabæk 0, Strøm's Godset 5, Sarpsborg 2, Tromsø 0, Vålerenga 0, and Molde 2, Brann 0. I mean, that 5 goals for Strøm's Godset, Steve, probably plays a part in the question. But what is it about this team? Who are the key men? What gives you that feeling of confidence that they can actually climb the table?
Well, the manager they brought in is Jürgen Isnes, who I think I talked about him quite a bit in the pre-season show, and intriguing fella. I would like to talk football with him one day. I must say, I think he'd be a very interesting guy. And, he's come in here, and the culture at Godset has always been really 4-3-3 for several years. He's had to make this, he's coming in with his 3-4-3 system, which is like sometimes 3-4-1-2. And I think when you make such a huge change, it can take quite a long time. Like, I'm talking several months here if you go back to pre-season. And I think the first few rounds of the season, they weren't bad. It's just you could tell the players were not really still used to playing in the way that he wanted them to play. But we've gradually seen some signs. Their first 2 wins were both to 0, which was very encouraging. They had a good performance against Haugesund in, I think it was match day number about 10, maybe 9 or 10. They lost the game, but they absolutely battered them. I looked at the metrics for that match, and I'm thinking, if they keep that up, that they're going to really improve. And then the next 3 matches have been wins to 0, and they've beaten Godset to 0. They beat Buda Glimt 2-0. I mean, that's an eye-catching result. Went to Stabæk and won 1-0, and then the 5-2 against Sarpsborg. They've shown. I really like how he's got this a pressing system going, but it's not gung-ho pressing. It's really targeted pressing in certain areas of the field at the right time. They really harass. Clearly, they target certain opponents who they think is going to give the ball away. And it's quite intriguing. It's the Stabæk game especially. I watched all of that, and they were just always felt in control. You can tell this Isnes is a bit of a mastermind. He thinks outside the box. It's not conventional, It's definitely something a lot different. So 3 good wins in a row to 0, and then they played against Sarpsborg, and this is the difference between Billborn and Isnes. I think really Billborn's a bit of a. You've seen him. His sort of teams before. It can go crazy end to end. I mean, they won 6-1 last week, Sarpsborg, and then they go and lose 5-2. It's because he only plays one way only. When you look at Strom's Godset, they're capable of adapting, definitely, different patterns of football. So I think you are now looking at one of the best tactically run teams in the league. I think they can be they can be really good as an underdog, and they can be really good as a favourite, and they can play against possession teams. They can play against counter teams. And that's why I think they're a dark horse to finish in the top 4 or 5 now.
Tell us about Jonathan Braut-Bruns. 3 goals in his last 3 games. He got 2 at the weekend. And there's a very interesting link here with a certain Mr. Erling Haaland, isn't there, Steve?
I think he's his cousin. I'm terrible with these family trees out there in Norway because, since Haaland burst onto the scene, it feels like there's been like 10 cousins that people have mentioned. He's the next Erling Braut Haaland because he's his cousin, but he is legitimately one of his cousins. And I like Braut-Bruns. I think he's a really good number 9, actually. He's got a poacher's instinct. He presses really well. He's really got into this system of pressing at Godset under the new manager. Again, targeted at certain periods of the game. Perfect player for this system, really, that he's put in. And I think it was only a matter of time before the goals came for him, really. He's missed a few chances at times, but everyone does up front. And, he's got his reward. He keeps going. They were 2-0 up 2-1 up very, very quickly in this game. It was a wild start. 3-2 after 23 minutes. Sarpsborg love to suck teams into a shootout, and Godset happily obliged. 3-2, and then the second half, Godset got a couple of more goals. But I've been impressed with Jonathan Braut-Bruns. I think if you look at his metrics, he does get into some great positions. He hasn't always been clinical, but I think by the end of this year, how many goals he got? Like 5 or 6. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up with about 15. I really don't. 5 league goals now. He could get between 12 to 15, I think, if he keeps at this. Yeah,
and they've got some, sort of fairly sort of tricky fixtures coming up. The next game is away to Brann, and we're going to move on to Brann actually because you've got a bit of a talking point about them. They lost obviously the weekend just gone to Molde. Steve, you've got some opinions. You got some hashtag opinions on this one.
Well, it's Molde 2, Brann 0, and this could have been 5 or 6 to Molde. First half especially. Eirik Horneland described Brann's performance in the first half as like an Obos Ligaen team. He was very, very critical, very harsh on his players, but he wasn't wrong. It was men against the boys. I thought Molde absolutely obliterated them in that first half. I've no idea how it was only 1 goal. Probably because Molde didn't have a striker on the field. They were either injured or on the bench. So maybe Brann were lucky there that they just didn't finish very well. But I think it was a worrying performance from them. And there's been a few recently from Brann. I think they just look like they're maybe running out of steam a bit to me. They lack squad depth. Away from home, their record isn't particularly good. They've been brilliant at home, and which is great. But I always said didn't have this season. I think I don't think we can expect miracles from Brann. You know, people saying they're going to be challenging for the title, challenging for medals. They still may well get a medal, and they've won the Norwegian Cup. They're going to be in Europe. It's been a brilliant campaign, but let's just not forget who they just played. They're Molde are one of the best teams in the league, and you know, you describe them playing as like an Obos team. Well, they were an Obos team last year. It can happen. They've been promoted. You're allowed some poorer performances. So I don't know what I'm being here. I guess I'm being a little bit critical, but at the same time, I don't want to be harsh on them because they've had a great year. And I just think they've always been tainted by this really high expectations, like put them on by the media, by general football supporters in Norway, maybe even by their own fans. And in a way, it didn't surprise me that something like this would happen because it was 2-0, but it could have been, like, say, 5 or 6.
Yeah, and I guess the main talking point really is, you know, you just mentioned there a little bit, but just to elaborate on this point, are Brann running out of steam? I mean, you did kind of call us in early season. I remember you sort of you weren't 100% on the Brann train. You maybe had a couple of toes just outside the waters, didn't you? You weren't fully convinced by that hype. Do you feel sort of slightly vindicated now? And just elaborate your thoughts on that. Do you think they are starting to maybe just show a few signs of slipping away slightly?
Yeah, definitely. And they only just beat HamKam in their most recent home game. It was a laboured win. It just felt tired. I think at the start of the season they would have won that one probably 3 or 4. So, but the squad depth is just not there. They've lost a couple of players. Wolf has been sold. Rasmussen's been sold. They haven't. I think they did sign someone from the Obos this week. I can't remember who it is, but I mean, I'm just looking at their bench on the weekend. I mean, for a start, it's only a 6-man bench. Nicholas Castro's on there, but apart from him and the goalkeeper, it's just youngsters. That's all it was. They've had to go with this youngster Torsvik at left back, who looks like a decent talent, but that's asking a lot for a young lad. I think he's 18 years old. He is 18, only just turned 18 as well. So, yeah, they need to reinforce the squad this window. Not necessarily improving the starting 11, but they need a lot more bench options because they've not even had injuries yet either. So if they come, then there's going to be even more trouble. And there's no way a squad this small can be continually up there in the top 3 or 4. It just can't. So that's my gripe with them. I did fear this at the start of the season, but you would think as a club they will rectify it in this transfer window, especially now that they're in Europe.
What's been going on with Berisha, Stephen? He's not exactly hit the heights this season. He's got, let me just pull up the stats. I think he actually did score in his most recent game, but that's his first goal of the season. 2 assists as well in 518 minutes, Steve. A lot of fanfare. What's been going on with him for Molde?
I think his big problem in the last 2 or 3 years has been fitness. I don't think he would, if you asked, hand on heart, you asked him, how many weeks have you genuinely been fit for when you've been on the field, fully fit? I think he honestly wouldn't be many matches. And that's been a massive problem. He's always got some sort of niggle. He doesn't seem settled after he's left Viking at all. But that goal might just lift him. It was a good finish. It was a typical sort of striker's finish. And I think he can probably kick on from that. Does he suit this Molde system of 3-5-2? When everyone's fit, he's in strong competition with the likes of Brynhildsen, Wolf Eikram, Christian Eriksen. They've been using Eric Kitolano recently as a striker, who had a frustrating game, I must say. I think he was a bit over-eager. He's not really had many minutes from his move from Tromsø, but at the same time, he's an absolute physical monster. So I get why he's in the team. He's got a great engine. So Berisha, just what he needs to do is just nail down his place so he becomes like an indisputable starter, get the goals, knuckle down, stay injury-free, and he'll be fine. but there's just a feeling of unsettlement about him. That's my sense anyway.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. And of course, Mulder, as you say, that they're well off the top, aren't they? They're sort of 10, 12 points behind Buda Glimt, who you said you think will go on and win the league. They're 8 points clear. Tromsø have a game in hand, but it's looking quite good for Glimt, Steve. Just briefly.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of that game against Odd, 2-0 win. It wasn't their best performance at all. It was the sort of win that, champions sort of have quite a few of these wins over a season. Just nothing glamorous, solid, get the job done. They were only really ever sort of in gear 3, absolute tops. Pellegrino bagged a goal. The first goal was a deflected one. Odd didn't play too badly, probably should have scored. But just what they needed after a couple of dodgy weeks, a win 2-0 away from home, where, and there is more in the tank for them as well. They've had a tremendous first half of the season, and they can certainly, I think they can play better than they have been doing in the recent weeks. So they just went off the boil a little bit. Maybe it'll come back again soon.
Yeah, and just explain to the listeners, in terms of the Champions League, there's no Norwegian teams in action this week, as far as I'm aware, as far as you've told me anyway. Just explain why Häcken are playing in Europe this week and Glimt aren't. Or Molde aren't, sorry.
Yeah, it's also the same with the Conference League qualifiers. It comes down to UEFA coefficient, and fundamentally, Häcken have not been in Europe much in recent times, and Molde have, and Molde reached group stages. I'm just looking now at the actual draw. Molde will be playing the winner of match number 5 on the list, which is KI or Ferencvaros. Match number 7. HJK Helsinki or Larn is who Molde will be facing in the next round. Häcken just didn't have the coefficient numbers to enter in the following round. Simple, like Galatasaray and FC Copenhagen are entering in the next round of Champions Path, for example. So it's as simple as that. Molde have managed to build up coefficient points. The same in the Conference League qualifiers. I think Djurgården and Buda Glimt are obviously entering later than some of the teams enter it. So it just comes down to the UEFA system, basically, Jonathan. But Molde will be, in action 25th of July and then 2nd of August, where, that you would expect them to beat HJK or Larn, wouldn't you? So after that, probably someone much tougher.
Yeah, good bit of trivia there, because I didn't have a clue why there's no Norwegian team. So hopefully any listeners might be wondering. You've got your answer there from Mr. Meatman. Going to move on to quite a big talking point here, Steve. And we've got a listener question from Fecciones Systems at PHXSYS. What do you think the chances are of Rosenborg actually going down to Obos are this year? Do they need to do a Brann and go down and reset? Now, the background to that question, obviously, is they're 12th in the league. They've got 13 points from 14 games. They lost half their matches this season. They've won 3 games out of 14. And in the most recent game, that's ended in chaos. Just tell us, a bit more about how that game against Lillestrøm ended. And then hopefully you can open up the discussion and answer that question.
Yeah, Rosenborg won, Lillestrøm 2. Rosenborg took an early lead. It was a great finish. Ollie Christian Saita with a brilliant hit. And then they kept that lead for a long period in the game. I think it was 83rd minute, maybe, something like that. Anyway, it was a scuffed Akor Adams finish. Now, in between that, there was loads of chances at both ends of the field. The finishing was diabolical. Adams, Len Olsen were all over the place. Rosenborg should have added to their advantage, but again, the finishing wasn't there. But 1-1 heading into, I think, 89th minute, and then a VAR penalty, which looked fair, actually. I think VAR got this one right. It was a silly challenge on, I can't even remember who did the foul now, but it was clearly, might have been Skjelbred. Just completely kicked down a Lillestrøm player kind of needlessly. Andre Hansen actually made a good save from the same move. So, they could have even scored and it would have been play advantage. But penalty was given. Akor Adams took it, and I had a feeling he was going to miss. I didn't fancy him over this kick at all. They fannied around in the build-up with who's going to take it. This thing about, I think Liverpool started this, didn't they? Protecting the penalty takers, sort of bollocks. It's all in the mind games now, isn't it? So Adams stepped up. It was a poor penalty. Andre Hansen saved it. But unluckily for the goalkeeper, it came straight back to Adams and he headed it into the net. So when your luck's not in, is it? And then I think there was 8 minutes of injury time. It was a bit wild, but there were no more goals. Can you just remind me that question again? What was the exact wording of that question?
Do they need to do a Brann, go down and reset? And are they going to go down to Obos?
Yeah, I think it was like, what are the chances of them going down? I think maybe for the first time, I'm going to have to acknowledge that there's a risk of it. I can't believe it will happen, but I suppose from a percentage perspective, there's maybe a 15%, 20% chance, maybe. You can't. These results can't continue. It's not good enough. The one thing I will say about this league, as opposed to say Sweden, where IFK and EFK are in trouble, do I see Rosenborg? Honestly, I think there's enough poorer teams that are just going to be worse than them. You know what I mean? There's always going to be 2 or 3 worse in Eliteserien, so they could still have a really poor year, but should still survive just simply because of the ineptitude of other sides around them. And also, again, they are creating chances. But all 3 games that Svein Marlins took over, the chances are there, but they're not finishing them. The 1 goal they scored was a brilliant finish. The XG was probably about 0.05 or 0.1, but they're missing much bigger chances. So sort that out, and they will be all right. But it is a concern. Now, they sacked their manager and they've lost all 3 games. You expect it to be the other way around, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's incredible that we could see AIK, Rosenborg, and IFK Göteborg all in sort of even a conversation about relegation. But listen, you're never too big to go down. If the football these days, we talked about at the top of the show, if you're not on your game, modern football is advanced now that teams aren't that bad anymore. There's a lot of good teams with infrastructures that are punching sort of above their weight. Obviously, Brighton may be the blueprint in England. And there's teams that are similar to that, aren't they? And you mentioned Godset there. We've looked at other teams in Sweden who are doing well, and you can't take things for granted anymore in Rosenborg. It doesn't really look like they can take it for granted, is it? Because they are plummeting.
They are plummeting, and they've got, as I say, they've got a set of fixtures coming up soon, which are massive for them. A home match against Tromsø, Godset away, Odd at home, and then Haugesund, HamKam, and Ålesund. So I think the next 5 games, they're all definitely winnable contests for RBK. They've got to do something about it, because I think that match there against I think they should have won the game. I do. I think there's enough chances to make it 2-0, and then when you don't get the second goal, I think the last probably 10 to 15 minutes, 20 minutes, that's maybe where they did lack a manager who's maybe a little bit more astute, knowing the need to get a result. I like Marlon, I do, and I think I still think he can do all right there. But when you need a win, you just find a way to keep that clean sheet, okay? Drop a bit deeper, tactically set yourself up. Where Lillestrøm was still creating chances in that period. Too many chances for my liking. So I think that one they let slip. They need to get something out of that game. And the pressure's on.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that listener question. It's a great question, really, and incredible that we're even debating it. But as I say, you can.
It is incredible that we are debating it. It's ridiculous. Rosenborg getting relegated would be the maddest thing I've ever known in my years of covering football anywhere, I think, in the world.
It is genuinely like Juventus have been there a few times, but it is like Bayern Munich getting relegated, isn't it? Something like that, maybe.
Yeah. Without any like deductions or something. Yeah.
It's like Real Madrid. It's like Real Madrid getting relegated. Incredible. But let's move on. Obviously, a good win for HamKam. which we just briefly mentioned there. Obviously, shout out to Tom Den. I saw a tweet where he put out there they've got a vital win there against Arleston. And I think the tone of his message was stick with us, basically. So they're in a battle. But in terms of the next talking point, Steve, before we wrap up the show, obviously the resurgence of Viking has been an interesting one.
Yeah, and I do want to say well done to HamCam in that game. They showed a lot of fight and belief, and both teams actually showed plenty on there. It's interesting, HamCam and Allsvenskan. I'm not ruling them out at all from survival. I think there's something there for sure. Maybe we can touch on that another week. But yeah, Viking are going well, almost under the radar a bit. Viking. Have you seen anyone talk about Viking at all this season? Really, it's not really been too apparent. But they're up to third place, and they've won 4 games in a row. So I think fair play, and they've got a game in hand on most teams around them as well. So very impressed with them. A 2-0 win against Haugesund, another local derby match, which they've won. Beat Brann, of course, recently as well. And a clean sheet, first clean sheet in a while. I think there's a really good feeling around Viking. And when this club is feeling good, when the players are clearly confident and enjoying football, it's a great place to play football. Last season, they didn't have that. It was a bit more of a miserable atmosphere. But they've got momentum. And, this is a club in the past that can go on streaky runs. And, there is some decent quality here. If they can maybe add a couple of players in the summer window, then they could well be looking at definitely a medal position.
Yeah, I mean, you asked if anyone's really talked about Viking. I've seen a lot of talk about Trippic. Is he rumoured to be maybe
Trippic?
Yeah. Is he rumoured to be maybe on the move? How big has his impact been? It seems like he's maybe the main talking point of Viking at the moment.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few fantasy players who want to get him in the team, but he's too expensive for him. I think it was a week where everyone kind of knew he would do well, but people were reluctant to buy him. But yeah, he's a brilliant technical player, and he's like a talisman of the team. And he's intelligent, and he's another player that when he's had some injury problems, but when he's fully fit, he's a difficult man to stop. I thought he controlled this game. He used his head. I don't think he'll leave them. He actually did leave them. I need to look at his transfer history, but I think he had a year away from the club about 3 or 4 seasons ago. It might have been Cyprus or somewhere that he went. I'm just looking now. It's just Göztepe in Turkey there. So, yeah, that he didn't work out for him, though, and he was soon back at Viking within a year. So that was a $500,000 move. So I think he's had that move. It didn't work out for him. So I think he's going to be quite happy in Norway, really, for a bit, unless he gets stupid money in one of these Arab states. So I don't think he's going to be going anywhere.
Yeah, he's 30 years old now, but it seems like, he had a decent performance at the weekend. Haugesund, not a team we really tend to talk about too much, but they're still they're above Rosenborg at the end of the day with a game in hand on them, so they're not having too bad a season. I know you were quite down on them in pre-season, but not doing too badly. But we haven't got too much time to talk about them. Let's move on.
Just a quick thing about Haugesund. One thing I'll say about them: they've got experience in their squad on their manager, and they kind of know how to pinpoint their fixtures that are winnable, and that's what they've done this year. And looking at it now, I said at the start of the year I think they'll go down. I actually think they might well have enough to survive now, just because they've got that nous to know what games to attack, and that's important in football. Yeah,
very, very important. And on the flip side of that, we talked about HamCam and Arleston, 2 teams down there who you said that they could also maybe survive. But we do have Sandefjord as well in the relegation playoff. But one team who isn't really doing too badly from that point of view that you did want to talk about is Stabæk. Now, bit of controversy, Steve. In terms of the season, they're not doing too badly, are they? They're 9th. But a bit of skullduggery going on there.
Well, this is a match that Stabæk should have won. I think they were the better team throughout. They missed a penalty. Mushaka Bakanga missed a penalty in the first half. And it looked like they were going to win the game. Right at the death, a goal was scored from a corner. Didn't look anything wrong with it. And afterwards, but it was disallowed by VAR on some offside technicality. But the player offside was just not interfering at all. So I don't know why this goal was disallowed. Lars Vahinen was furious afterwards. Couldn't believe that VAR intervened. I think even Sandefjord was surprised that this goal was chalked off. So really, it's a bit of VAR controversy more than anything in terms of maybe the laws and things like that. I looked at this goal and I had no idea why it was chalked off. So there was a really bad feeling about the end of it from Starbek's perspective that they think they were cheated out of 3 points. And they say they'll look back at the whole 90 minutes and wonder how on earth they didn't get the win because they were by far the better team.
Yeah, and it's one of the things about Allsvenskan, no VAR at the moment. I mean, in a sentence, Steve, are you plus minus on VAR this season so far at the halfway point nearly of the season and its impact on Norway?
It's changed the dynamics of the game. There's, I say, the red card thing. We knew that would happen. Players have got to watch themselves and start adapting. They know they can't get away with certain things anymore like that. In the past, you get a yellow card or nothing. And now on VAR, any sort of really strong physical professional fouls and things like that are going to be punished. I think in general they've got quite a lot of the big decisions right. But that one there, look, that was really poor look. As good as the penalty decision was for the Akor Adams one at Lillestrøm there, that was an absolute shambles. So at the moment, I think it's definitely more negative than positive for me. But it is its first year in use in the league, so we've got to give them time in that respect, haven't we, to sort of iron things out, I suppose. The system itself, as I said many times, as a whole global thing, it's not for me. Yeah,
I think that's where we'll wrap up the show. Got a few more listener questions, but we don't really have time to get to them. Really, we had it's quite a long episode.
It has, yes.
And I'm sure other people. I'm sure if you're still listening to this, and you definitely deserve a gold star for your dedication. So please tweet us for listening to the whole thing if you did. One or two other questions. I mean, what is the most significant transfer into and out of each league so far from @BigSig5? I think we'll come back to that one. Please do ask it next week if you can. Got a question from Brendan Husabo as well about Asana in the Obos. I think we'll come back to that again as well. So please,
next episode I've got to have a section on Obos because I've been following it this year. So
put it on the itinerary.
It'll be on the itinerary.
Obos. Yeah, we'll come back to that question next week. So maybe make a note of that, Steve, and we'll come back to it next week. And we did have a question about Norwegian Cup quarterfinals as well, which we're going to maybe have to cover another time. And one from FPL Agent who said, if you could get one Swedish team and one Norwegian team to face off for a single game, which ones? And I think I'm just going to take the liberty of answering that question by saying, in the spirit of this episode, we would have Rosenborg against IFK Göteborg, and the loser goes down. That'll be it for this week. Thanks a lot, Steve, for all your efforts. And we've got obviously the return of European football this week, so next week should be interesting. And we're still working on one or two guests, which we might bring to you at a certain point. For now, you can find me on Twitter @JFFootball. You can find Meatman Soccer @Meatman Soccer, and don't forget the Patreon Belly Trial episode, player analysis. Very short episodes. These ones are like 15-20 minute analysis. Got another one coming out this week. Stay tuned for that, an exclusive, and hopefully you'll enjoy that. So patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast. But thanks for all that, Steve.
Yeah, you've nailed it there, Jonathan. I have nothing to add at all apart from wishing everyone the best. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time. It was a good episode, that one, and we'll be back for more soon. So goodbye.